Welcome to a deep dive into the fascinating world of Thomas Merton. Um, you've given us quite a collection of his personal journals, along with some biographical works that shed light on the man behind the monk.
Oh, yeah.
We've got excerpts from the Journals of Thomas Merton series,
Okay.
volumes 1 through 5, alongside standalone journals like Dancing in the Water of Life and No Man is an Island. And to add another layer, we'll be pulling from biographies like Mark Shaw, Beneath the Mask of Holiness, and The Intimate Merton.
It's a really unique opportunity to understand Merton's evolution, not just chronologically, but in terms of his thinking. What did he wrestle with?
Yeah.
What were his triumphs? And how do these experiences documented in these raw, unfiltered journals still resonate today?
As the mission here,
Yeah.
uncovering the man behind the monk, exploring his thoughts on solitude, faith, social responsibility, and seeing what we can learn from his journey. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with Merton's arrival at Gethsemani Abbey in 1941, The Intimate Merton paints a vivid picture of his initial fervor, the dedication to this new monastic life. He truly believes he's found his place. But could this intense enthusiasm be masking something deeper?
What's fascinating here is that Merton's early zeal is something many of us experience when we embark on any significant life change. Think about starting a new job or relationship, that initial excitement, the sense of purpose. It often stems from a search for meaning, for belonging. But as we know, those feelings can evolve.
We certainly do. And in Merton's case, this yearning for something deeper leads him to confront his worldly desires. Run to the mountain reveals his internal struggle, his efforts to redirect love towards God and service to others. He even writes about detaching himself from material possessions. It makes you wonder, was this a true calling, or was he running away from something else?
That's a question worth pondering. It speaks to the sacrifices we sometimes make when pursuing a greater purpose. But it also highlights the fine line between devotion and perhaps a form of escapism.
Wow, that's an interesting take. Maybe it's a bit of both.
Yeah.
It definitely adds another layer to his decision to embrace monastic life. And speaking of embracing things, let's talk about Merton's growing fascination with solitude.
Okay.
His journals, particularly Dancing in the Water of Life and No Man is an Island, are full of these beautiful passages about his joy in nature,
Yeah.
his craving for silence. He talks about feeling truly human when alone. But wasn't he surrounded by other monks? How could he be truly alone in a monastery?
Merton teaches us that solitude done right is an active practice of self-confrontation, not just escape. It's about creating that inner space for growth,
Okay.
for facing those inner contradictions he mentions throughout his journals, even when surrounded by others.
Okay, that makes sense. But reading his descriptions of spending entire nights reciting psalms in the dark, I've got to be honest, that's a level of dedication I can't quite wrap my head around.
It does sound intense, doesn't it? But remember, for Merton, silence and solitude were tools for self-discovery. And in No Man is an Island, he actually makes a really insightful distinction between what he calls true and false solitude.
Ah, yes. He says true solitude rooted in humility leads to generosity and peace, while false solitude driven by pride becomes destructive. But how do we apply this concept today? The world is so different than Merton's silent abbey. Everyone's constantly connected, bombarded with information.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Merton's insight offers a valuable framework for navigating our relationship with silence and connection in this hyper-connected world. Perhaps it's not about disconnecting entirely, but about finding those pockets of stillness amidst the noise. Those opportunities for genuine self-reflection, even when we're surrounded by others.
That's a great point. It's like finding that inner sanctuary regardless of the external chaos. Okay, moving on to a more delicate subject. Beneath the Mask of Holiness reveals a side of Merton many don't know: his relationship with a nurse he called Margie in the 1960s. Now, for those unfamiliar, this affair, revealed much later in biographies, really shook the perception of Merton and forced a reevaluation of his life. It threw his vows into question, forcing him to confront some incredibly difficult choices.
It's crucial to consider the social climate of that time. Attitudes towards love, sexuality, personal fulfillment were evolving rapidly. Even Merton, despite his monastic life, wasn't immune to these forces.
He wasn't. And his journals are brutally honest about this internal struggle. He grapples with his desire for love, his belief that he was being redeemed through Margie's love, but also the weight of his vows and his commitment to God. There's this one quote from Beneath the Mask of Holiness that really struck me. Nothing counts except love. That a solitude that is not simply the wide openness of love and freedom is nothing.
It's a powerful statement, especially coming from a Trappist monk.
Yeah.
It highlights the tension between Merton's yearning for a deeper connection and the constraints of his chosen path.
Exactly. It wasn't just a fling. This was a profound experience that challenged his core beliefs. It makes you think, what are we willing to sacrifice for what we believe in? Are there ever situations where our personal desires, our need for connection might outweigh those commitments we've made?
That's a question we all grapple with at some point, isn't it? And in Merton's case, the struggle ultimately led him to make a difficult decision, one that would have a profound impact on the rest of his life.
It did.
Yeah.
But before we delve into that choice and its aftermath, let's shift gears a bit. This next phase of Merton's life takes us beyond the monastery walls and into the turbulent world of the 1960s. His writings on peace, racial justice, the dangers of nuclear war become increasingly urgent.
He wasn't content to remain silent in the face of injustice. His voice emerges as a powerful force for social change, challenging the status quo and pushing people to think critically about their role in a world on the brink.
And a controversial one, I'm sure. In Passion for Peace, he uses incredibly strong language condemning nuclear war as murder, calling it immoral. These are bold statements, especially for a monk who supposedly lives a life of quiet contemplation.
He was a complex figure, wasn't he? Merton wasn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking, even within his own religious order. And his message resonates deeply with our own time, with the conflicts, the injustices, the environmental crises we face in the 21st century. He reminds us of the urgency of peace, the importance of compassion, the danger of blindly following ideologies. It's a call to engage the world with both our hearts and our minds, just as he did.
A powerful message indeed. All right, let's circle back to Merton's journals, focusing on his later years, the intimate Merton, and dancing in the water of life. Reveal a man who, even after decades in the monastery, never stopped questioning.
Right.
Never stopped evolving. It's inspiring to see how he embodied the idea of lifelong learning.
Yeah.
But there's a twist, isn't there? This dancing in the water of life entry from 1963. He mentions receiving invitations to travel, one to a conference and another to a retreat in Mexico.
Yes, and these invitations were incredibly tempting, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
The first was from Father Godfrey Diekman to visit St. John's Abbey for a conference on the interior life. Quite a draw for someone like Merton, given his focus on contemplation and solitude. And the second,
even more intriguing, an invitation to Cuernavaca, Mexico for a retreat led by René Voillaume and a conference on Latin America. It seems like the perfect opportunity to explore his growing interest in social justice issues on a global scale. Yet surprisingly, Merton decides against both.
He does, choosing instead to remain at Gethsemani to delve even deeper into his solitude. It makes you wonder, what was he seeking? What did he feel he still needed to discover within the confines of the monastery?
It's a mystery. And speaking of mysteries, let's talk about those late-night psalm sessions. In a 1965 journal entry, Merton writes, "It is imperative that I hear the silence of the night alone, and with my face on the floor say psalms alone in the silence of the night." What was it about this almost ritualistic practice that held such power for him? What was he hoping to find in those solitary moments?
I think it points to the depth of Merton's spiritual yearning. He wasn't simply following a routine, he was actively seeking a connection, a deeper understanding, and for him, silence, solitude, those were the pathways to that experience. He even goes on to say that the silence of the forest is my bride, and the sweet, dark warmth of the whole world is my love. Wow. It's almost mystical, poetic language, isn't it?
It is. And that language becomes even more intriguing when he talks about a secret that's heard only in silence, the root of all the secrets that are whispered by all the lovers in their beds all over the world.
Yeah.
Wow. What do you make of that?
I think it speaks to Merton's evolving understanding of love,
Okay.
his belief that there's a deeper connection, a unity that transcends the physical world. He's seeking a truth that's beyond words, beyond conventional understanding.
Yeah.
And perhaps he's suggesting that this truth can be found in the silence, in the solitude, in those moments when we strip away the distractions of the world and connect with the essence of our being.
That's a beautiful thought. But it's not all blissful contemplation, is it? There's a darkness in some of his journal entries, a sense of struggle even in his solitude.
Absolutely. He talks about the dangerous power of solitude, the potential for wide error. He acknowledges his own weaknesses, his inner contradictions. It's a reminder that even in solitude, the inner journey is never easy.
And that even someone who dedicates their life to contemplation like Merton grapples with doubt, with the complexities of their own inner world. He writes about the power of inner ambivalence, the pull of inner contradiction. He says, how little I know myself, really.
It's a humbling admission, isn't it? And it shows us that self-discovery is an ongoing process, even for a monk. He's constantly questioning, challenging himself, even as he embraces solitude.
And even questioning his own motives. In one entry, he asks, why have I been brought into the middle of all this? He's talking about the monastery, the community. He wonders about his responsibility toward the others he's influenced to join.
He's grappling with the weight of his influence, the impact of his choices on those around him. It's a burden many leaders, even spiritual leaders, face.
He also mentions feeling weak and confused. He even uses the word uprooting. This is after years in the monastery. It seems like this inner turmoil never really went away.
It's a testament to the human condition, isn't it? We all face periods of doubt, uncertainty, even those who seem to have found their calling. And Merton's honesty about these struggles makes him even more relatable, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It makes his journey feel more real, more human. He's not presenting himself as some enlightened being who's above these doubts and anxieties. He's right there in the trenches with us, wrestling with the complexities of life, seeking meaning and purpose amidst the chaos.
And that's what makes his story so compelling, so enduring. He invites us to join him on that journey, to embrace the uncertainties, the contradictions, the messy beauty of it all.
A beautiful way to put it. But before we get too philosophical, let's dive into some of those specific struggles, those doubts that Merton expresses about his life at Gethsemani.
Yes. Let's explore those moments of questioning, those glimpses of dissatisfaction that ultimately lead him to consider a radical departure from the life he'd built for himself. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Thomas Merton. Last time we left him grappling with a growing sense of unease, a feeling that perhaps Gethsemani, the very place he'd sought refuge in, wasn't providing the answers he was searching for.
It's almost paradoxical, isn't it? This yearning for a deeper solitude, yet also this growing tension within the community itself.
Yeah.
His journals reveal just how much he was wrestling with this internal conflict, describing himself as both a prisoner and an escaped prisoner.
Such powerful imagery, and it really gets to the heart of his dilemma.
Yeah.
He's caught between his commitment to the monastic life and this deep inner need for something more, something that perhaps even the structured solitude of the abbey couldn't provide.
And remember, it's not just about him. He's deeply concerned about the impact his potential departure would have on the other monks, especially those he'd influenced to join the order. He even writes, I lead them into the same ambiguities, and worse, I draw them here, and then they are frustrated and confused and have to leave. It's a heavy burden to carry the sense of responsibility for the spiritual well-being of others.
It highlights the complexities of leadership, particularly within a spiritual context. It's one thing to seek your own path, but quite another to feel accountable for the journeys of those who followed your lead. But amidst all this turmoil, Merton begins to experience moments of profound peace, even joy within the uncertainty. It's almost as if he's finding solace in the present moment, even as he contemplates a radical shift in his life.
Yes. There's this beautiful passage where he describes sitting in a cell, looking out at the landscapes of hills and woods and crazy barns, and feeling a sense of expansiveness, like he's on the edge of the sky. It seems he's finding solace in the simple beauty of his surroundings, even as he contemplates leaving them behind.
There's a deep sense of appreciation emerging, a recognition of the gifts that surround him. And it extends beyond the physical landscape. He reflects on the continuity he finds in the Psalter, the way it connects him to his own past and the past of Hermitism, a long lineage of monks seeking solitude and connection with the divine.
He specifically mentions the Latin Psalter, his connection to the saints of my Latin church.
Right.
It's as if he's drawing strength from tradition, from the spiritual practices that have sustained monks for centuries.
It's a grounding force amidst his uncertainty. But at the same time, he's also embracing the paradox, the inherent tension of his situation. He writes about the boiling that's part of his life, the need for psychological honesty.
Yeah.
He even references a Zen koan, what sound is made by one hand clapping against itself. It's a beautiful metaphor for the complexities he's grappling with.
It really is. He's acknowledging that there are no easy answers, that the journey itself is often the most important part. And this acceptance seems to lead to a fascinating shift in his thinking. Remember how he was initially so focused on going to Mexico?
Yeah.
Even envisioning a hermitage there?
Yes, he seemed completely captivated by the idea, but then almost as abruptly as it emerged, the allure of Mexico fades. He writes, I have no really strong desire to go away to Mexico. I can see how it would be interesting and valuable, yet it leaves me cold to a great extent.
Such a stark contrast to his earlier enthusiasm. It's like the appeal of the unknown has lost its luster, and he's realizing that perhaps what he's seeking isn't bound to a specific location.
Right.
He even wonders if he might find more of what he's looking for by simply staying at Gethsemani and asking for more of that. More time in the woods, more opportunities for solitude within the existing structure.
It's a fascinating turn of events. He's considering a simpler solution, one that doesn't involve such a drastic upheaval,
Right.
it suggests that sometimes what we're seeking is closer than we think, perhaps even hidden in plain sight. But there's a problem, isn't there? Merton's relationship with the monastery, with the community itself, is becoming increasingly strained. His ideals are diverging from theirs, creating a growing sense of dissonance.
Right. It's as if he's outgrowing the confines of the institution he's dedicated his life to. His journal entries from this period highlight the tension between his evolving beliefs and the expectations of monastic life. He even mentions a visit to Louisville with the Abbot Dom Gabriel Sorte, his first time outside the monastery in 7 years.
7 years. That's remarkable in itself. It speaks volumes about his dedication to the contemplative life.
Yeah.
And what was his impression of the outside world after such a long absence?
He simply writes, Louisville was boring. Anyway, the whole thing was obedience. A telling statement, isn't it?
It reveals so much about his state of mind. He's not enticed by the allure of the world beyond the monastery walls. His focus remains inward.
Right.
And his sense of duty of obedience to his vows and to the abbot is still very much intact. But even obedience can become a source of tension when your inner world is pulling you in a different direction.
And this tension is only amplified by his growing awareness of the world's problems. Remember his concern about nuclear weapons? Well, that anxiety deepens as he reads more about what's happening outside the monastery walls. He becomes increasingly disillusioned with what he sees as a culture of violence and materialism, a world teetering on the brink of self-destruction.
He feels a responsibility to speak out against these injustices, but his position within the monastery limits his ability to do so. He's trapped between his conscience and the constraints of his chosen path.
He describes the artificiality of his position, the fact that his writings, which reflect his evolving views on social issues, are starting to disturb people within the community. He feels like a bird in a cage longing to take flight, but held back by the bars of tradition and expectation.
It's a powerful image, and it leads him to consider a radical solution, living as a hermit not just within the monastery, but completely separate from it. He envisions a space where he can live according to his own ideals, a space free from the constraints of monastic life, where he can fully embrace his solitude and connect with the divine on his own terms.
It's a bold move, and it shows us just how serious he is about finding an authentic expression of his spiritual life. But it's not a decision he takes lightly. He grapples with the practicalities, wondering about finances, about finding a suitable location. He even considers the possibility of forming a small, independent community of like-minded individuals.
He's thinking outside the box, exploring different avenues to create the life he envisions. And it's clear that this isn't about simply escaping the monastery. It's about creating something new, something that aligns with his evolving beliefs and his deepening commitment to solitude as a path to truth.
He writes, no nonsense about asking permission to live as a hermit here and raising all the futile questions and pretenses this would involve. It would get me into a whole network of lies for the sake of one grain of truth. It's a powerful statement, a declaration of independence from the structures that he feels are stifling his spiritual growth.
He's willing to risk everything, even his standing within the community, to find his truth. And this conviction leads him to take some concrete steps. He begins to search for suitable locations for his hermitage. He mentions a remote valley where there were once 2 cabins for freed slaves 100 years ago, suggesting a deep connection to history, to the struggles of those who sought freedom and autonomy.
He's drawn to places steeped in meaning, places that resonate with his own yearning for solitude and spiritual liberation. And in a twist of fate, his search leads him to an unexpected discovery. A small, abandoned cabin on the monastery grounds. It's not ideal, but it's a place where he can begin to experiment with this new way of life, to dip his toes into the waters of a more radical solitude.
It's a pivotal moment. He's taking his first tentative steps toward the life he envisions, even though he faces opposition from some within the monastery. They see his actions as a rebellion, a rejection of their way of life.
They do. They accuse him of selfishness, of abandoning the community. But Merton feels he's following a higher calling, a path that leads him toward a deeper understanding of himself and his relationship with God. He's committed to his truth, even if it means challenging the status quo, even if it means disrupting the harmony of the very community he's been a part of for so long.
It's a courageous act, a testament to his conviction. And this commitment to his own truth resonates in his writings from this period. His language becomes even more poetic, more introspective. He's delving deeper into the mysteries of faith, exploring the intersection of contemplation and social action. He's seeking a way to integrate his inner world with his concern for the world around him.
He writes about the need to separate myself from a civilization that is utterly contemptible and false and heading for its own destruction. He's not just retreating from the world. He's actively critiquing it, challenging the values and systems that he believes are leading to suffering and chaos.
He's calling for a radical reorientation, a return to spiritual values, a recognition of the interconnectedness of all beings. And he's not just preaching from a soapbox, he's living his critique, seeking to embody those values in his own life, even if it means stepping outside the boundaries of the institution he's been a part of for so long.
He's a prophetic voice, challenging us to confront our own complicity in the systems that create injustice and suffering. And he's doing it with a sense of urgency, a conviction that we must act now before it's too late.
His message resonates with a power that transcends time and place. He's speaking to our own anxieties, our own struggles to find meaning and purpose in a world that often feels chaotic and overwhelming. He's reminding us that we have a choice, that we can choose to align ourselves with a different set of values, a different way of being in the world.
He writes, "The one thing that has to be remembered, none of this is of any value if it is simply forced on superiors. I have no intention of doing that. A question of loyal cooperation, frankness, and trust in seeking the truth with them." He's seeking a dialogue, a respectful engagement with those who hold different views. He's not interested in imposing his beliefs on others. He's inviting them to join him in a search for a deeper truth, a more authentic way of living.
It's a nuanced approach, a testament to his maturity and his commitment to finding common ground, even amidst disagreement. He's modeling a way of engaging in difficult conversations, a way of seeking understanding and connection, even when we hold different perspectives.
It's a powerful lesson, especially in our own polarized times. But let's not forget the personal side of things. Merton's journals from this period also reveal a deep longing for love for human connection, even as he embraces solitude.
Yeah.
And this longing leads him to a relationship that challenges everything he thought he knew about himself and his vocation.
He falls deeply in love with a young nurse he meets during a hospital stay. He refers to her as M in his journals, a symbol of the secrecy and intensity of their connection. It's a forbidden love, a love that threatens to unravel everything he's built his life around. And yet he can't deny the power of his feelings for her.
He writes, "Love is our destiny," which is a bold statement for a Trappist monk.
It is.
He seems to be redefining his understanding of solitude of spirituality itself. He's suggesting that true solitude is not about isolation, but about the wide openness of love and freedom, about connecting with the divine through the experience of human love.
He's challenging conventional notions of monasticism, of spirituality itself. He's suggesting that love in its purest form can be a pathway to a deeper understanding of the divine.
But this relationship inevitably creates immense conflict. He's torn between his vows, his commitment to God, and his love for this woman. His journals are raw, honest, and incredibly moving as he navigates this seemingly impossible situation.
It's a testament to the complexities of the human heart. Even those who dedicate their lives to spiritual pursuits are not immune to the power of love, of desire. And it's in these moments of struggle, these moments of intense inner conflict, that we often discover our deepest truths about ourselves.
He's forced to confront some fundamental questions about his identity, his purpose, and the very nature of love itself. It's a universal struggle, isn't it? This tension between our desires and our commitments, between our longing for connection and our need for solitude. And Merton's journals offer a profound reflection on how to navigate these complexities, how to find meaning and purpose amidst the messiness of human experience.
He's not offering easy answers, but he's inviting us to grapple with these questions alongside him, to find our own truths through the lens of his own journey.
And that journey takes him to some unexpected places, both physically and spiritually. He begins to explore Eastern religions, finding parallels between his own contemplative practices and those of Zen Buddhism.
Right.
He's expanding his horizons, seeking wisdom from different traditions, pushing the boundaries of his own understanding.
And this openness to new perspectives leads him to some profound insights. He writes about the union of contemplation and eschatology, the realization that we are on our way, that because we are on our way, we are in that truth which is the end, and by which we are already fully and eternally alive. He's connecting his contemplative practice to a larger sense of purpose, a vision of ultimate reality that transcends the boundaries of time and space.
It's a powerful synthesis of his spiritual explorations. He's weaving together threads from different traditions, creating a tapestry that reflects his own unique understanding of the path to enlightenment.
And this tapestry is constantly evolving as he encounters new ideas, new people, new experiences. He travels to Asia, meeting with spiritual teachers from various traditions, deepening his understanding of contemplative practice, and expanding his vision of human interconnectedness.
He's embracing the unknown, venturing beyond the familiar, seeking a wider perspective on the human condition.
And it seems to deepen his compassion, his sense of connection to all beings. He writes about the need for generosity, the importance of sharing, and mutual care. He's moving beyond the narrow confines of his own personal journey and embracing a wider vision of human responsibility.
He's recognizing that true solitude is not about isolating ourselves from the world, but about using the insights we gain in solitude to serve others, to contribute to the well-being of all beings. And this vision leads him to become increasingly outspoken about social justice issues. He writes about the need to resist injustice, to fight for peace, to challenge the systems of oppression that create suffering in the world.
He's becoming a prophetic voice, a voice that calls us to awaken to our own complicity in systems of injustice and to use our voices and actions to create a more just and compassionate world.
And he's doing it with a passion and eloquence that's both inspiring and challenging. He's not afraid to ruffle feathers, to speak truth to power, to call out the hypocrisy he sees in those who claim to be religious, yet turn a blind eye to suffering. He's holding a mirror up to society, forcing us to confront our own shadows, our own failings.
And he's doing it with a sense of urgency, a conviction that we must act now before it's too late. He writes about the danger of blindly following ideologies, the need to engage the world with both our hearts and our minds. He's calling for a more conscious, more compassionate way of being in the world.
It's a powerful message and one that's incredibly relevant today. Let's not forget that Merton was also a man of contradictions. He craved solitude, yet longed for connection. He was deeply spiritual, yet fully engaged with the world. He was a monk who fell in love and questioned everything he thought he knew about himself.
That's what makes him so human, so relatable. He wasn't a saint on a pedestal. He was a man wrestling with the complexities of life, just like the rest of us. And his journals offer a profound reflection on that struggle, a glimpse into the heart and mind of a man who dedicated his life to seeking truth, even as he acknowledged the elusiveness of that very truth.
Yet he never stopped searching, did he? Right up until the very end of his life, he was exploring new ideas, challenging his own assumptions, pushing the boundaries of his understanding. His final journal entries are filled with a sense of wonder, a deep appreciation for the beauty and mystery of life. He writes about his travels, his encounters with different cultures, his ongoing spiritual explorations. He describes a flight over Alaska, the vast expanse of tundra, the winding rivers, the lakes crowded together and shine like bits of broken glass. It's beautiful imagery, evocative of the awe and wonder he felt in the face of nature's grandeur.
And he reflects on his conversations with spiritual teachers from various traditions, including a fascinating encounter with a Tibetan Lama who taught him about the practice of severing the soul from the body. He was always seeking, wasn't he? Always open to new experiences, new ways of understanding the world and his place within it.
It's an inspiring testament to the power of lifelong learning, the transformative potential of stepping outside our comfort zones and embracing the unknown. And it's a reminder that the spiritual journey is never truly finished. It's an ongoing process of discovery, of deepening our connection to ourselves, to each other, and to the mystery that surrounds us.
And that's perhaps the most enduring legacy of Thomas Merton. He invites us to embark on our own journeys of discovery, to question, to explore, to embrace the complexities of life, and to find our own unique paths towards truth meaning and a more compassionate way of being in the world.
But before we wrap up this episode, there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to explore. It's a topic that's often glossed over in discussions of Merton's life, but it's one that's central to understanding his struggles and his ultimate transformation. His relationship with Margie, the nurse he fell in love with.
Yes, this relationship challenged his vows, his beliefs, his very identity as a monk. It's a story that's often told in hushed tones as if it's something to be ashamed of. But I believe it's crucial that we face it head on because it reveals so much about Merton's humanity, his vulnerability, and the complexities of the human heart.
Absolutely. It's not a simple story. It's a story of passion, of longing, of heartbreak, and ultimately of redemption. So let's dive into this pivotal chapter of Merton's life, exploring the choices he made and the lasting impact of this forbidden love on his journey. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Thomas Merton. We've been exploring his journey from the early days at Gethsemani to his growing disillusionment with society, and of course his profound struggle with solitude. Now we're turning to a chapter that often gets whispered about his forbidden love for Margie, the nurse he met in the 1960s.
It's a story that really challenges the very image of Merton as a cloistered monk, revealing the depth of his human experience.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, this wasn't just a fleeting infatuation. His journals, especially Beneath the Mask of Holiness, show us how deeply this relationship impacted him.
Right. It wasn't just a physical attraction. Remember that powerful line, "Love is our destiny." Merton genuinely believed he'd found a different kind of fulfillment in Margie, a love that actually deepened his spiritual understanding.
What's striking is that he felt this connection was divinely guided, almost a form of spiritual redemption.
Wow.
It challenged his vows, of course, but also forced him to confront a core tension, the desire for love and connection versus the dedication to a life of solitude and God.
And it wasn't an easy battle. Beneath the Mask of Holiness paints a picture of those agonizing months where Merton wavered, unsure whether to follow his heart or his vows. He even sent Margie a letter breaking things off, only to immediately regret it and try to salvage the relationship.
His journals reveal a man wrestling with two powerful forces. On one hand, there's this pull towards love, freedom, and personal fulfillment. On the other, the deep-rooted commitment to faith, duty, and the monastic life he'd so carefully built.
It's like his very identity was on the line.
Mhm.
Makes you wonder, how do we navigate those moments when our heart and our obligations are at odds? Where do we find our true north?
That's a question each of us has to wrestle with. And for
Right.
Merton, it seems the answer ultimately came down to choosing God over Margie. It wasn't an easy choice. His journals are filled with sadness and a sense of loss.
There's a real heartbreak in his words. But amidst the grief, we also see hints of relief, a kind of clarity emerging from the decision.
And what's fascinating is that even though the relationship ended, it left an indelible mark on Merton. His later writings reflect a more nuanced understanding of love and a deeper compassion for human struggle. It's as if he emerged from this experience with a heightened sensitivity to the suffering of others.
His social activism definitely becomes more pronounced. He speaks out about the need for peace and justice with a newfound urgency. It's almost as if Margie unintentionally opened up a part of him, allowing him to connect more deeply with the pain of the world.
This connects beautifully with his earlier search for true solitude. The experience with Margie seems to have been a turning point. He realizes that genuine connection isn't about physical proximity,
Right.
but about recognizing and honoring shared humanity, even in those who are different from us, who are suffering, who are fighting for justice.
His own struggle seems to have broadened his perspective, and this shift is visible in his relationship with the monastery itself. The intimate Merton highlights how after the affair, his longing for solitude becomes even more intense. It's no longer a vague desire, but a deliberate choice. He's determined to delve deeper into this aspect of his life.
But of course, even a deliberate choice doesn't erase the inherent challenges of monastic life. He's still wrestling with those inner contradictions, the pull between his individual needs and the expectations of the community.
There's this journal entry from 1965 that I found particularly striking. Merton writes, "To be conscious of both extremes in my solitary life, consolation and desolation, understanding and obscurity, obedience and protest, freedom and imprisonment." It's almost poetic, yet so raw and honest.
He's not sugarcoating anything. He's bearing his soul, acknowledging that even decades into monastic life, the search for understanding for his place in the world is ongoing.
And he doesn't shy away from the difficult parts. He even talks about feeling a kind of wasting in solitude, a loss of the psychic strength that can come from being around others. This is a vulnerability you don't often hear about when people talk about the monastic life.
It's his honesty that's so compelling. Merton doesn't pretend to be above these struggles, and this honesty is precisely what allows him to keep pushing forward, to keep seeking. He embraces the darkness and discomfort, recognizing that they often hold the seeds of deeper truths.
He's an example of someone who leans into the hard parts of the journey. And eventually, those truths lead him to a more tangible solitude. Remember that little cabin he found on the monastery grounds?
Right.
He eventually gets permission to move into a hermitage, a small, secluded space where he can fully immerse himself in the contemplative life.
That's a major turning point. And it wasn't without pushback. Some members of the community saw it as a rejection of them, a selfish pursuit of isolation.
Absolutely. There was definitely a sense that he was turning his back on the community. But for Merton, this was about finding a space where he could truly be himself, live by his own rhythms, guided by his own inner compass. And it seems to have unlocked an incredible surge of creativity. His writing from this period is prolific. He's exploring new ideas, pushing boundaries, experimenting with different forms of expression.
His language becomes even richer, more evocative, weaving insights from his contemplative practice, his social activism, and his studies of Eastern religions. It's as if the solitude of the Hermitage provided the space he needed to synthesize all these different strands of thought and experience.
He's creating a unique spiritual tapestry, one that's deeply personal but also speaks to universal human experiences.
And he's doing it all from a place of profound solitude, a solitude that's not about cutting himself off from the world, but about deepening his connection to the very source of all things.
He writes about feeling lightness, strangeness, even desertedness in a solitude. But there's also this overwhelming sense of peace of acceptance. It's as if he's finally found his true home, a place of belonging, both within himself and in the world around him.
a true sense of homecoming.
Mm.
And this feeling permeates his final journal entries. He writes about the beauty and peace of the solitary life, acknowledging the difficulties, but also emphasizing the profound fulfillment he's found. It's a delicate balance and an integration of his inner and outer worlds that he seems to have achieved after years of searching.
But it's not a static balance, is it? He's still evolving, still seeking. He even describes his encounter with Chapi Thichin Rinpoche, a Tibetan Lama, who introduces him to different types of bodhicitta, the aspiration for enlightenment. It's a beautiful example of how even in solitude there's room for continued growth, for expanding one's understanding.
Merton embodies lifelong learning. His story reminds us that the spiritual journey isn't about reaching a fixed destination, but about continually opening ourselves to new possibilities, new ways of understanding ourselves and the world.
And ultimately, that's what makes Merton's journey so relevant to us. It's a story about seeking, about struggling, about those moments of finding and losing, and ultimately about discovering a deeper truth within ourselves, a truth that connects us to something far greater than ourselves.
He reminds us that even someone like a monk dedicated to a life of solitude and contemplation can be messy, contradictory, full of longing and doubt. And it's in those very imperfections, those human struggles, that we find the seeds of growth, transformation, and a more compassionate way of being in the world.
Beautifully put. As we wrap up this deep dive into Thomas Merton's life and work, let's leave our listener with one final thought from his journals. A thought that encapsulates his journey, his struggle, and perhaps offers a starting point for their own exploration.
He writes, "The thing that strikes me is the reality of the whole thing. It is not a dream, but sober, practical truth. The kind of truth against which we artificially insulate ourselves in our little world of illusions. This is something that really sounds like the gospel, and at the same time, solitude and real separation from the world."
It's a powerful message, a reminder that the truth we often seek, that deeper connection with ourselves, with the divine, with the world around us, is closer than we think. It might be waiting for us in the stillness of our own hearts, in those quiet moments of contemplation, or even in the messy, beautiful complexities of our everyday experiences.
So as we conclude our deep dive into the life and legacy of Thomas Merton, we invite you to embrace the journey, to explore the depths of your own solitude, to connect with the world around you with an open heart, and to discover the truths that are waiting to be revealed.